I'm Tamara Massett. I was about to say Tamara Babbitt, but I got married. And I'm the Training and Technical Assistance Coordinator with the Oklahoma Coalition. And I am going to welcome and turn it over to Michelle Stansel and Elizabeth Sudas, who will be presenting our Partners in Prevention webinar. So ladies, thank you guys so much for being here. And show is all yours.
Great. Well, thank you so much, Tamara, for having us, and thank you everyone who's on this and listening. And hopefully, this is going to be really informative, and hopefully, it'll be engaging in the sense that you can ask questions as Elizabeth and I present this information. So, my name is Michelle Stansel, and I am the Administrative Programs Officer and Rape Prevention Education Coordinator in Injury Prevention Service at the Oklahoma State Department of Health. And what that means is that I oversee a grant that we have, and we have 7 subcontractors, so they're prevention educators housed out of domestic violence and sexual assault agencies, and they go into middle schools, high schools, and colleges, and they do prevention programming, so talking about consent, bodily autonomy, how to deal with rejection appropriately, talking about rape culture, rape myths, and all of those important topics. And so my job is to train them and provide technical assistance, as well as working with those in the community. I also oversee the Oklahoma Prevention Leadership Committee, and we'll be talking more about that in depth. Elizabeth?
Good morning. I'm Elizabeth Suddis, and I am the Director of Prevention Services and now the School Climate Transformation Project Director with the Oklahoma State Department of Education. And really quickly, just about my office at the State Department. So the Prevention Services Department is over all bullying prevention, substance abuse prevention, suicide prevention, and violence prevention in schools. So within that violence prevention, it is broken down into sexual violence prevention as well as dating violence prevention. So on that side of things, we give resources to schools all across Oklahoma to provide them with resources on how to do prevention programs in their school on a school-wide level. And also we can provide resources like different curricula that are available on those topics, any professional development training. We focus a lot on trauma-informed training with schools and all of that stuff. And then with the School Climate Transformation Grant that we did just receive, we are really excited about this grant. And we now have regional behavior specialists and technical assistance centers all across Oklahoma. So we are now able to serve every county in Oklahoma to provide these services to talk about positive school climates and how to have healthy relationships with students and healthy peer relationships. And we can actually go in and work individually with schools. So it is really exciting what the prevention department is doing at the State Department of Education and how receptive schools have been to that as well.
Okay, so hopefully these are some objectives, some things that we're going to be going over, but hopefully at the end of this, you all are going to be able to differentiate between primary, secondary, and tertiary prevention. We're going to discuss the socio-ecological model framework and public health models, also recognize the importance of collaborative efforts. So for example, earlier I mentioned OPLC that I oversee. We'll go more into depth and detail a lot about that. Interpret challenges to collective impact framework, which is the structure that we use for OPLC, and demonstrate ways you can implement prevention in your community and how prevention and intervention connect. So hopefully have some tangible takeaways for you all.
Okay, so to get started, we are going to do pretty much a Prevention 101. So if you have never really heard of prevention or worked in prevention before, this is just kind of some of the background over what prevention is, how it is different than intervention, and then we'll go into more detail about that. So the very first question I usually get asked when doing prevention in school is, well, what is prevention? We're doing all of these intervention strategies. How is it any different from that? And at the State Department, I am housed in the counseling department. So my supervisor is actually the executive director of counseling. And what we usually say when we go out together, when we are presenting together, is that she is intervention and I am prevention. And to really get people having that mindset that these are two different things, but they do work really closely together. So when we think of intervention, that is more of that crisis intervention level. So this is efforts, that when we intervene shortly after somebody has experienced a crisis. And then these efforts help to aim the individual to lessen the impact of the crisis. So, for example, referring somebody who has experienced dating violence to services and treatment. That would be an example of intervention. So on the other side of that is prevention. And you might hear the word health promotion interchanged with prevention, and I actually use those terms interchangeably all the time. I know the prevention field is going more towards calling it health promotion, but a lot of times when I say the word health promotion, people think that we're talking about physical activity or nutrition, and all of those things are within health promotion, but it's definitely all of these other topics that we have addressed as well. So prevention efforts are put in place before anybody has ever experienced or assumably ever experienced one of the crises or of the topics that we talk about. So they often focus on multi-level public health models, and they are created to help prevent the occurrence of the negative health outcome. So for example, teaching healthy relationships in a classroom can be a prevention program. So the second question that I get asked all the time is, do we actually need prevention? And I would venture to say that nobody on this webinar would disagree with me that we need prevention. I'm sure we're all of that same mindset that we need to prevent some of this stuff from happening. But these are statistics that I show in a lot of our schools and across the state, just to really show how much we do need prevention on these health topics. So something else that I really talk with schools about and do trainings about is, my office is centered on different lanes of different topics. So either bullying prevention, substance abuse prevention, suicide prevention, and schools or agencies can do all of these different types of prevention programs. But really I started looking more into research is where is the tie and what is the underlying causing factor for all of these different negative health outcomes? So instead of having schools or agencies do all of these, a 10-week program on bullying and then a 10-week program on suicide prevention, let's look at the underlying cause and what is the one thing that we can address to really hit on all of these topics, because so many of these topics are interconnected to one another. In the more research and everything that I found, everything really goes back to if we can address how to have healthy relationships, then that's a way to prevent all of these other health outcomes from happening to our youth. So just with that being said, the statistics that support that, so 73% of adolescents who report being in an abusive relationship report using alcohol in the last 30 days, compared to 36% of students who are not in an abusive relationship. So that really starts hitting on our substance abuse prevention, because we can see a huge increase in people using alcohol after being in an abusive relationship. 42% report depression compared to 27% of students in not an abusive relationship. 31% engage in high-risk sexual behavior compared to 16% of students who were not in an unhealthy relationship. Being in an unhealthy abusive relationship makes teen girls 6 times more likely to become pregnant and twice as likely to get an STI. So there we start, looking more into those different rates of sexual health promotion as well. And then half of youth who have been victims of both dating violence and sexual assault have attempted suicide, compared to 12.5% of non-abused girls and 5.4% of non-abused boys. So we really start seeing all of these connecting pieces go back to one central theme, and that's unhealthy relationships. So the more we can start talking to youth or adolescents about how to have healthy relationships, also healthy peer relationships, the more we can start seeing the prevention of all of these other health topics as well. So you might have heard this story told before, but I think it's a really important story to really connect the dots between prevention and intervention and how we all work together. So I will just go into it really quickly. So this river is a river that is on a farmer's piece of land. So one day he was going out to just check on his land and look all around, and he noticed that there was people who were floating down the river needing his help. So the farmer went over to the river and started pulling people out and saving them. After so long, he started to realize, there is more people than I can save and rescue. So he went to town and got all of his friends to come and help him save the people who were drowning in the river. He noticed that one of his friends started walking upstream, started walking up the river, and he was like, "What are you doing? Why are you going upstream? There's people here that need you. We need to save all these people who are drowning." So this friend went up the river, and a little bit later he came back down to the other group of people, and they noticed that there were few people who were floating down the river that they had to save. And they asked, "Well, what did you do?" He said, "Well, I went upstream and I noticed that the bridge was out. So I put up barriers, and I put up a big sign that says, this bridge is out, so don't cross here, go around a different route." People just couldn't see, so they were going over and didn't know there wasn't a bridge and falling into the river. So that's exactly what prevention is. It's going upstream and figuring out what is going on here and how do we prevent people from falling into this river. What barriers can we put into place, or what health promotion programs can we put into place so we have fewer people in the river? So with that being said, there's always going to be some people in the river, and that's why intervention is so important, but also where we work together with prevention of how do we collaborate in this together so we have fewer people in the river, but we also need people there to get the ones who are still in the river and in the stream. So there are 3 different levels of prevention. Primary prevention focuses on preventative measures before any violence has occurred. Secondary prevention focuses on after the violence has occurred, we aiming to prevent it from happening again. And tertiary prevention is ongoing support of those who have experienced some type of violence. So, for example, support groups for survivors. That would be an example of tertiary prevention. So a lot of you are probably working in this secondary and tertiary level of prevention because, of course, we want it to prevent from it ever happening again. But really where the field of prevention exists is in this primary level. So it's focusing on people who have never experienced violence before to try and prevent that from occurring. So in one of the statistics that was on the previous slide, on the Oklahoma slide, it talks about how violent behavior typically starts showing between the age of 12 and I believe it said 18 on there. So if we know that violent behavior typically starts showing around the age of 12, the best time to do primary prevention is before the age of 12. So preferably, from day one of somebody's life. But the more we can get those primary level of prevention, the less likely that person is to exhibit those behaviors. So this is the social ecological model. This is a model that a lot of primary prevention programs are aimed or are developed after. And this model really drives how to do some of these different primary prevention models. So what we see in this model first is individual. So that's increasing individuals' knowledge about a certain health topic. And then the next level is relationships. So looking at the relationships that the individual has with peers or in a school setting with relationships with adults in the building, having trusted adults, and those sorts of things. The next level is school-wide, or that can be organization if it is an agency. So what is in place organizationally wide to promote prevention? And then the next level is community, and then the very top level is policy. So the more you start working up this model, the further you get away from the individual, but still the policy level affects the individual also at the same time. So what we know about this model is that if we can focus on even 3 of these areas in a program, then you are more likely to elicit some sort of behavior change. So this is why this model is used, in agency settings, in organization settings, and school-wide settings to drive different programs. So really quickly, I just wanted to give you all an example of maybe what the prevention education coordinators, if you have one with your agency or in your organization, what their different examples of these the social ecological model might look like in a program. So you can just be more aware of possibly what these people are doing within your organization. So at that individual level, an example that we see a lot is doing education in the classroom setting. So this can be a prevention education coordinator actually going in and doing one of the curriculums that we have over healthy relationships and sexual violence prevention, or it can be training that teacher in the classroom of how to implement one of these programs. There are a lot of really great programs that do exist out there, and they pretty much script exactly what to say. We always suggest if somebody is doing one of these prevention programs that they do it in a multi-week setting. A lot of times people just try and do it all in 1 week, or if it's a 4-week program, just try and do it in 4 days. But we always suggest to do this either once or twice a week for multiple weeks at a time, because that is the best way that research shows that these individuals are actually getting that information and retaining the information. We always let people know, never do just one-time big assemblies or just do a one-time big meeting if it is within an organization, because that has been proven not to work or to have adverse effects on the group as well. So with this individual level, it might look like counselor support. So if somebody is needing those intervention services, this is a really great level to connect the dots between that intervention and prevention piece, and also providing any mental health resources. So on that relationship level, a really great example in schools is doing any sort of peer teaching or peer education programs, and that really starts building that relationship level, doing support groups or any advisory or planning committees. So on a school-wide or an agency-wide, organization-wide, this can just be any, campaigns that you want to get out for schools. We suggest that maybe, the creative department or any of the art students in the art department can create posters, and you have more of that peer buy-in. Doing trainings for faculty and staff, or doing any sort of trainings, within your agency or within your organization, really gets out the message that this is something that we take seriously And this is something that we really want to start addressing within our school or within our agency. When we think of community pieces, that is more stuff just to get people more involved in the community, to know that this is an initiative that we take seriously. This is an initiative that our agency takes seriously, and how do we bring more people into that? So having local events, notifying like in schools, notifying parents of policies, notifying the people within who have any connection to your agency about initiatives that you're doing or about policies that have been changed. Doing newsletters is a great way to get community information out to there. And then contacting any other agencies that you could possibly be working with. And then finally, at that policy level, this is a really important piece, and it can look differently in a lot of different places. So if an individual has all the knowledge, they have built up their relationship skills, if there's not policies that back up the message that we are trying to send, then it can be really, it can be a hindrance on that side as well. So what we always suggest for schools or agencies or organizations is to review your current policies, and do they align with your vision? Do they align with your mission? Then after that, make appropriate changes if there needs to be. And so a lot of times I do break this down for educators as well. Is there any classroom policies? So in your office, is there any policies that you can create just among your coworkers? So you might not have control over those agency-wide or organization-wide policies, but what policies or agreements do you have some control over that you can start implementing, just to, get that, to change the climate really around what you're focusing on within your organization.
Oh, and I just wanted to jump in real quick, and everything that Elizabeth has covered as far as with my portion and I say our PE team, so the rape prevention education, those prevention education coordinators that I mentioned earlier, just to recap so that you all are aware. So we have Rachel Eskridge at the YWCA in Oklahoma City. We have Sydney Fredericks and Divis in Tulsa. Kirsten Minton at Wings of Hope in Stillwater, Beth Anderson at Community Crisis Center in Miami, Oklahoma. We have Emily Nichols with the Women's Resource Center in Norman. We have Cassie Van Sant at SafeNet in Claremore, and we have Lindsay Miller in Help in Crisis in Tahlequah. And so they are all doing, just like Elizabeth said, when you're looking at that individual level here on this chart, they are doing different curriculums such as bringing in the bystander, Green Dot, Safe Dates, and Shifting Boundaries. So these are evidence-based programs. Now what I will say is that they're doing more evidence-informed, and the reason why I use that term is because they're taking this evidence-based curriculum and they're modifying it to the needs of the community that they're serving. So if they're in certain schools, they're going in and they're getting direct feedback from students. So one thing, for example, was students gave feedback on this is great, but you didn't talk about digital abuse, which is what we are experiencing, and we need more information on that. And then as far as relationships, they are really working on student leadership development and what that looks like in each of the schools that they're working in, and collaborating with the students, like what Elizabeth said, with the poster campaigns, using social media as a unique platform to promote these messages, and then also integrating themselves and doing community level work as far as working with the parents and developing more initiatives than just going into the classrooms. And although the awareness component is super important and the baseline knowledge is super important, it's really this multifaceted approach in, like Elizabeth had mentioned earlier, in engaging in all levels of the socio-ecological model. So that's all I wanted to throw in there real quick so you all can wrap your minds around that.
And then this next slide on prevention, I just wanted to give you a basic overview of what this program could look like in a school setting. So again, all of those prevention education coordinators that Michelle just named. So you have an idea of what they are doing in the school. The curricula that are on here are some of just some different ones. So this program is actually a program that I implemented when I was the prevention education coordinator with RPE. So just to give you an idea of what that looks like. So for the different groups, we really wanted to focus on faculty and staff and having a time frame of when we would do the trainings with them. And what we did, we just developed a training for the faculty and staff. And then under the SEM level, that's a social ecological model. So that level identifies which area in that model that addresses. So for that one, it was area 3, which is school-wide prevention. So for students, some of the different things we did, we went into the fall FACS class and did one of those curriculum programs that we were talking about. We're doing a fall core class. So really the more we can get into core classes or train some of those core class teachers, the more students that we can see, getting that program. And then also a spring core class to address any of the students who didn't receive it in the fall. Doing a spring school assembly. I know you're thinking, you just said don't do assemblies. Assemblies can still be good as long as you have some of these other components going on as well. So as long as we're doing big meetings or big initiatives and backing up with all of these other areas of the model, it can be a really strong piece to it. Having advisory boards, and then also having leadership groups with students. So the next group that we really wanted to focus on was with coaches, because at this particular school, that is an area that we wanted to make sure we were addressing. So with coaches, we train them in different curriculums with their male athletic programs and the female athletic programs. With parents, we wanted to connect that community piece because parents are a huge piece to, or parents and guardians are a huge piece to this prevention component. So we did fall and spring parent talks and also PTO and PTA meetings. And then we did some after-school programs. Those were done bi-monthly just to, really start driving that a little more. And then yearly, we would review policies. Do the policies make sense for the vision, mission that we were trying to go through? And then a digital campaign that was done at all times.
Yeah, and just to, sorry, I'm going to jump in real quick again as far as, and thank you, Elizabeth, for sharing this stuff. So for those of you that are on this call and you're like, oh, I recognize some of the names that you mentioned, or they're housed at my agency and everything, in order to do this work, the prevention educators don't necessarily have 9 to 5 p.m. jobs. They are all over the place doing different components of the SEM model. And so going into the classrooms and doing that, building the relationships with students, which might be after hours or like on a weekend, and doing different programming. So it's going to look a little bit different in each area, but the underlying theme is that you're going to see them like watching videos because they need to have media literacy, and they need to be up to date on how to be relatable to students, for example. And so they're not necessarily always going to be at their desk doing work unless they're developing a presentation or something specific. They're going to be running around all over the place trying to hit every level of the SEM model. So just wanted to throw that out there and share that. Thank you. Oh, and we'll go ahead. We'll go ahead to the next one. So I'm going to talk to you all about, and Elizabeth will talk to you all as well, about the Oklahoma Prevention Leadership Committee, or OPLC for short, and just delve in and see, like, so we have the RPE team on the ground in the schools doing work. I will say that we're also working a lot with our teen pregnancy prevention people, because sexual health promotion is sexual violence prevention, and aligning those initiatives and strengthening those relationships and what that looks like. And we're also working with our our friends over at the Oklahoma Department of Mental Health and Substance Abuse Services, because again, those risk and protective factors are identical when you look at suicide prevention, drug and alcohol, and all of that. So I'm going to go ahead and jump in and talk to you all about the OPLC mission. So OPLC connects Oklahoma's violence prevention specialists, fosters multidisciplinary collaboration, and provides ongoing training to support member organizations in our mission to end gender-based violence through prevention. And so essentially, we have a bunch of different stakeholders that come together to do this overarching mission. And so they come from all walks of life. They're usually somewhere within the prevention or intervention field and doing services. They could be housed in K through 12. They can be in higher ed institutions. Of course, the RPE team is there. We do have members from Sexual Health Promotion coming. And we, in the past, have had military people and faith-based organizations, Native Alliance as well. So just an eclectic mix of individuals all coming to the table for the same mission. And as far as commitment to being involved, we ask that they're involved for at least 2 years. If it's something that they realize this is, not what I can take on at the moment, they can always contact me directly. But we have quarterly meetings, and then we also have subcommittee meetings as well that are determined by the members of each of those subcommittees. And just wanted to share that. But here's your secret word, by the way, connecting the dots. So write that down. Now, the goals of OPLC is focusing on primary prevention and reducing risk and vulnerability factors and increasing protective factors, using the best available evidence, making sure that it is theory-based, that we're just not making up stuff on the whim, implementing collaborative efforts to be comprehensive, and so otherwise like SMART goals, which is what we're still currently working on. Now, OPLC has evolved. I used to do work at a local university for 4 years, doing advocacy, so providing direct services and doing prevention work at that university campus. And I've been in this role as the Rape Prevention Education Coordinator for a little over 2 years. And in that time, I've made the transition from being a representative of a university and coming to OPLC meetings to now transitioning to the role of actually overseeing. So a couple of things to throw in here, and I know Elizabeth has some stuff to share as well, but one thing I noticed was that there was we kept getting lower and lower attendance rates, and at first we were like, what is going on? And so we knew, okay, step one, we need to go back and look at our evaluation, because we do have an evaluation that we administer at the end of every meeting, and what you're looking at is the actual evaluation. And so what we noticed that was for the last question, I know what my role is as a member, was historically very low. And so we thought to ourselves, well, if we're asking people to commute, whether it's 10 minutes or, we have people that commute out as far as 3 hours, and we're asking them to give up their time, time is very precious, then that's a problem, and that might be a contributing factor to why our attendance rates have decreased over time. So then we decided to go ahead and start reaching out to all the listed members that we have on our Excel spreadsheet and organizing calls with them or exchanging emails and being like, hey, tell me about your experiences with OPLC. What did you like about it? What did you not like about it? And why have you continued to come, or why have you stopped coming? And do you plan to come back or whatever? And just kind of getting feelers out and assessing what was really going on. And from that, we were able to come up with a plan to restructure OPLC. And I guess, Elizabeth, can you jump in and share with them kind of your experience as far as, because you had been in different worlds of prevention before jumping into your existent role, and kind of what the changes that because I can talk all I want about my perspective, but what's your perspective and how it's changed?
Yeah, so I very first started going to OPLC because it was an assignment in one of my classes when I was in college. And so I just stumbled upon OPLC, and when I went, it thought, wow, there's actually people who are working towards the same things and have the same ideas of what I want to be working towards. It was also my first introduction to know that this world even exists of preventing dating violence and sexual violence. So OPLC on that side of things was really great. And then I started working actually as an intern in dating violence prevention, and so I would attend the meetings on that side of things. So I definitely learned a lot from the people who were there, who were attending the meeting, and just having that shared framework of working towards violence prevention in our state. Then after that, so when I graduated college, I actually started working for a sexual health promotion grant, so teen pregnancy prevention. And so at that time, I thought, well, OPLC, I can't go there anymore because they are just focused on sexual violence prevention and dating violence prevention. And now that I'm in this other world, this other grant, there's really no place at the table for me. And it was almost feeling, I guess, maybe intimidated by OPLC, might be a good word to describe it. So I stopped going to OPLC while I was with this other organization. And then I reached back out and attended a couple of meetings here and there. And then I actually got back into the dating violence prevention world. And that's when I, got back into OPLC. And that's really when Michelle and I believe a lot of people started having the conversation. We don't need to be exclusive, or not that OPLC was ever intentionally exclusive to some of these other fields, but really that we should all be working together. We're all doing prevention in the state, and like I talked about with those statistics, so many of these different health issues are related.
Yeah, those risk and protective factors are identical.
So that really, came back to, okay, OPLC should be a sounding board and kind of that connecting piece to every different prevention field within our state, so we can all come and share, how all of this stuff is related, how we have the same, like you said, risk and protective factors, and we really are working towards the same mission. So that's really how we started, or I experienced seeing OPLC evolve from being more centered on sexual violence prevention to prevention as a whole, if you agree with that.
Yeah, no, I totally agree. And thank you for sharing that, because I think it's important for everyone that is listening to know that there is a place for you at the table. If you're doing intervention work, if you're doing prevention work, even if it's not explicitly, like the focus is in your area, not on sexual violence prevention specifically, doesn't mean that you don't have a seat at the table, and doesn't mean that your voice isn't equally as important as everybody else's voice. And we've been, I think, very intentional of trying to get different voices at the table, and it not just be rape prevention education. OPLC is not a RPE program. This is an overarching, this is for Oklahoma. We're trying to lead the way in prevention work and really collaborating a lot with one another. And so as we started to reach out to members and send emails and do phone calls, then we started getting this idea, okay, we need to restructure it. And we decided to, and I'm going to go into that a little bit more here in a minute, utilize collective impact framework and figure out how does that fit into what we're currently doing. Now, it did take about 4 meetings to get to our current place, which I'll also expand upon in a little bit. And as far as our members, the overall feedback that we got from them was that, kind of very similar to what Elizabeth shared, was that it was very intimidating, or they just felt that, whether we intended that or not, what was happening is that people didn't feel like, well, I don't do specifically sexual violence prevention work, so I think I'm just going to stop coming because I don't know how my voice can contribute. And so, again, knowing your role was a really good indicator for us on what we needed to start looking at and we needed to start changing. And so we what we decided to use was called Collective Impact Framework. And I really love this little infographic, but basically, at the end of the day, all collective impact framework means is addressing that question and giving every single person that comes to the table a role to have, where they understand what are they contributing. I don't know about you all, but nothing is more frustrating than when we're doing all the important work that we're doing, and then that we're going to meetings that we don't feel, one, is benefiting us to a degree, but also that we don't feel like we are being heard. And so collective impact framework essentially gives a role and helps elevate everyone's voices. So you have a common agenda. So all participants have a shared vision for change. And so one of those things was we decided to do, OPLC had a certain mission statement that had existed for X amount of years, and we decided to give that back to our members and be like, okay, this is all of us collectively, so you all need equal input. So let's, at the bare minimum, let's just start, or a launching point, let's start by rewriting our mission statement. Shared measurement, so collecting data and measuring results. And so there's different data out there that we have, NSVRC, NSVIS, there is RAIN.org, we have the Youth Risk Behavior Assessment, so YRBS. And so those are all different resources that we can pull from. Mutually reinforcing activities, so we've been trying to figure out for the last couple of years on how to really do that collectively. So participant activities must be differentiated while still being coordinated through mutually reinforcing plans of action. And so I think that's where our subcommittees really fall into place with that. And continuous communication. So being as not just transparent, but also just having constant communication and constant building the rapport. I think that with relationships and doing this work, it's give and take. And so, if I'm asking you all to come to the table, like, what can I do to help you? And also, like, how can I continue to effectively communicate with you, whether that's one-on-one meetings, sending email messages, talking by phone, and then really the last one is having a backbone organization. And so the backbone organization is the Oklahoma State Department of Health, because this is housed in injury prevention, and this is my role. And so for me, it's providing that support and structure to the members for whatever they're needing help with, like that I'm a constant resource, and I want them to know that. And then also, as we get into the subcommittees, it'll be a little bit more clear as far as like what my role looks like within that. At this point, I know that Elizabeth and I have been talking a lot, and so are there any specific questions that you all have that you want to type in that we could address in regards to just prevention in general, some of the stuff that Elizabeth went over, or specifically any questions so far about OPLC that you're wondering or curious about? We'll give you all like a minute. No questions so far? Well, hopefully you all, it looks like somebody is trying to call in. Yeah. So it looks like somebody, hold on one moment while we try to, oh, that's me, never mind, surprise. Okay, well, let's move on to the next slide. But yes, please just be thinking about questions, because, as we want this to be as interactive as possible, even though we know that it is a webinar, but you have the keyboard in front of you. So if you do have a question, please type it in and we will answer it as we're continuing to talk. So with collective impact, we have different phases. Like, I'm going to be very upfront and honest that we are currently still very much in phase 1. And, I think that we've identified champions from other areas of work to help with like our subcommittees, for example. But we haven't got to we're not going to be at phase 2 for a little while, or phase 3, and we're still trying to work out what that timeline will look like. But for right now, we are in phase 1 and initiating action and what that looks like as far as the infrastructure of OPLC. And then I think with the subcommittees right now, we're kind of in that part as far as mapping the landscape. And so kind of, if you will, putting, you know, our pulse on it, figuring out like what is really happening. And so us as the professionals in the field, we have an idea, but at the end of the day, we really need to get out into the community and ask the community what is happening, and getting more of that community involvement going on as well. And so I think so again, we are at phase 1, we're at the very top, and still we've identified champions, and currently we're in that strategic planning portion. And what I'd like to see is the eventual movement to facilitating community outreach and doing programming. The subcommittees have some really great ideas that I'm going to share with you all. And then again, going back and analyzing baseline data that we have, or figuring out other ways that we can collect more data. But again, we are definitely very much in phase 1. But our goal is to get through phase 2 and phase 3. Now, so we have several different subcommittees. The first subcommittee I'm going to talk to you all about is our Prevention and Education Subcommittee, and that's or we just call it the K through 12 subcommittee, basically. And this subcommittee's purpose is to promote sexual violence prevention, increase awareness of sexual violence in K through 12 schools. In addition, the subcommittee provides support and guidance, and provides training for any educators serving youth. And so that's the initial, that's been the vision, and so far the members of that committee have not changed that vision of what they're wanting to do. These are actual pictures of Oklahoma classrooms, in case you're wondering. I did not pick out just random ones. They're actually in Oklahoma. And right now, just to get an idea of what they are currently doing, they want to work on a website, so having information, resources, and statistics that is easily accessible for those in the community, because until coming on board to the subcommittee, they really didn't know what the efforts in Oklahoma, like what was going on. The assumption is like nothing's being done, and so them being pulled in, it's kind of opened their eyes. And they also said, you know, like something that we'd like to see is like some sort of website where we can access this information really easily. And so they're working on that, and like where that will be housed and what that will exactly look like will be determined coming up. They do want to have an event to bring the community together, and this can be, they talked about having a series of smaller events, having a bigger event. Some ideas that have been thrown around is doing like a parent event and getting parents to the table in different communities. So that could be Norman, Oklahoma City, Edmond, figuring out ways to get out into Miami and Tahlequah, and figuring out like, okay, let's do a pilot program and learn from that pilot program and then launch it in other areas. We've all talked about the idea of doing a cross-systems youth prevention summit. There's been a lot of discussion about how there's so much resources for the professionals in the field, but there's not a lot of stuff for youth. And so like when I say youth and young adults, so high school age students and college students, to go to a training, learn the skills, resources, information, and then take that knowledge and go back into their communities and do change. And so we threw around the idea of like trying to get something like that started up at some point, which is going to take multiple relationship building and all of that, but I think that it's a very worthy idea to pursue. And in our last OPLC meeting, which was November 1st, we did have one that was scheduled to be here in February, but due to the weather, we ended up not being able to have it. But in the last one, they talked about recruiting school representatives and getting more youth input, because they looked around the room and realized there was not a lot of, there's no teachers able to come, and there wasn't just a lot of school representation. So they're working on reaching out and wanting to recruit more of that representation. Feedback from them is that they want to know, or they need to know how they can support the overall mission of OPLC. And they talk a lot about, these are actual direct quotes from them. It all comes back to sex education and talking about it. Schools should send a representative to get involved. And maybe they want to look into maybe creating and sending out a survey to assess what's happening. And some of that too is like, I think in educating the team as like what currently exists, and then going from there and figuring out like, could we create something that is different than that? Now with the higher education subcommittee, there was a current like mission statement for there specifically, and they went and changed it up. So this is what they came up with. With the Higher Education Subcommittee, it's comprised of OU, UCO, Rose State, and OSU. And so that's just, those are just the 4 schools that currently are involved. They definitely want to recruit more higher ed institutions. But their vision is that Oklahoma Institutions for Higher Ed will work together with community partners to create innovative, inclusive, streamlined, evidence-based, and research-informed prevention education and information network. And their mission is prevention professionals from around the state will collaborate, network, and assess best practices for prevention efforts within higher education communities to increase the quantity and quality of individual prevention outreach efforts by focusing on the vision, which is a lot of words there, but I think that it really does funnel very well back into OPLC's overarching mission statement. So just to get an idea of what they are currently doing from the last, and they've had meetings in between our quarterly meetings, but their first goal was to form a prevention education network. What they talked a lot about was the fact that they were each doing equally important work at OU, at OSU, at UCO, at Rose State, but they really didn't have a relationship with each other prior to OPLC. They didn't know, like, okay, this person is housed here, and this is what they do specifically, and this is the programming that they do. So they've created like a Google Drive share folder, and it's just resources that pertain specifically to dating violence, sexual violence, bullying prevention, like all of that type of stuff, but specifically with an emphasis on Title IX and higher ed. And they want to add other users to that as well. And their other thing was like working as a small group so that they could really not just establish their vision, but really harness that and what that's going to look like within their own areas. But they really want to work more with other universities. That's the thing that we discussed a lot about, is getting out of the silos. They're all doing really important work, and how can we unite across the state in providing and sharing resources. I know, having worked at a university myself prior to this position, it was really hard getting that program off the ground. And you know, I got lucky in reaching out to other universities who were willing to share their resources and everything, so I didn't have to reinvent the wheel and start from scratch. So I think that them moving this direction is really awesome. Their other goal is to create and implement collective and collaborative programming and trainings. And so whether that is working with each of them have peer educators, or are working towards getting peer educators and that youth leadership development, and figuring out how to work on different projects throughout the year, sharing their calendars, and maybe you know, having something as simple as like getting a speaker to come to Oklahoma, and then sharing, and then having that speaker go to the different schools. Goal 3 is to teach the same things across the state. So really be intentional as far as like, what is the verbiage, like what is the message that they're sending, and like whether it's being a proactive bystander or sexual health promotion, or the language that is used, like how are they being cognizant of that. And then other topics they've talked about is reaching out to diverse populations and being mindful of the intersectionality. And so part of that is also talking about like how can they edit, modify, and make their presentations and their trainings more culturally relevant and really showcase that intersectionality. And then they have what's called the National College Health Assessment, and that kind of ties into their work, and so how they can use that more to their needs as far as like across the board. They did have we collectively all got together on Friday, November 16th, and we did a half-day training. And so things that they shared with me were they wanted to be more aware of data that needed to be aware of sharing, how to collaborate or partner effectively with on-campus and in the community organizations, how to be in contact with one another, share information, how to do assessments and climate surveys, how to be seen as an expert on campus, You know, they talk to me a lot about how it's interesting. There's so much great work being done in the community, but what's happening is that they're being bypassed a lot of the time, where people in the community are reaching out, or maybe somebody from their institution is reaching out to someone in the community and being asked to come on, but then there's no connection of bringing them into the fold of the conversation. And really, like, you know, their goal is to try to reach everybody, but how can they do that? And then addressing challenges in general in the position. So we're going to go ahead and move to Policy and Legislative Subcommittee. So this subcommittee works to end sexual violence through public policy advocacy, and this includes engaging in the legislative process and influencing laws, policies, and regulations to promote the prevention of sexual violence and to meet the needs of sexual violence victims and survivors at the public policy level. So now, I think something I skipped is that within Collective Impact Framework, you try to identify 2 community leaders that are passionate about this. So I think the caveat is that the hard part is that most of these people have full 9 to 5 or 8 to 5 jobs, that they are working 40 hours a week. And so these people in the community, these champion leaders, there's something that's passionate, but then of course the backbone organization myself is helping kind of keep that momentum going. So with the Policy and Legislative Subcommittee, we currently have one person leading that, and that is Stacy Wright with Yes All Daughters. And so currently, and I just have to do a disclaimer, the information I am sharing is just for informational purposes only, and it's a courtesy to the Policy and Legislative Subcommittee within OPLC. And so the inclusion of the slide, I just want to be really clear, since I'm an employee of the health department, is not an endorsement by OSDH, Injury Prevention Services, or the RPE program. But again, I wanted to show you all like what is being done here in Oklahoma, and specifically with this subcommittee. So they are Stacy is working towards getting Lauren's Law passed, and basically it is getting information and training and resources to teachers that is evidence-based, that talks essentially about consent and how to be trauma-informed. Again, making sure that they're trained and they understand that. Now, I think something really important to share is what Lauren Atkins had said, which is I really don't think, and this is, if you don't know about Lauren Atkins, you can go online and Google this information more in depth. But she's really the face of, she is Lauren, and she's the face of Lauren's Law. And she was raped at her high school. And she talked, when they interviewed her, she talked about how, I really don't think that the perpetrator was male, that he did this to me to be a terrible human being. He didn't know that this wasn't allowed. And so her whole thing is we need to be talking more about consent. And so I just, again, wanted to share that with you. We're not endorsing that in any shape or form, but as far as like what is going on legislatively, but just for you all to be knowledgeable that the subcommittee is working on that. So if you are listening to this call and you are someone that is a mover and shaker in your community and you want to be involved with something like that, you can definitely reach out and I can get you connected to the appropriate people for that. Now, with the Youth Advisory Subcommittee that we have, this subcommittee is working with 18 to 24-year-olds, and this is the current mission statement as it exists, but this is being modified, so you can take a look at it, but I'm not necessarily going to read it out loud to you all. But basically giving opportunities for peer-to-peer mentoring, leadership development, and really empowering and elevating their voices and getting their voices funneled to the other subcommittees and things that they should be taking into consideration. So this is an actual picture of the subcommittee, and that was a recent meeting that we had last week. Now, we were able to recruit students through the Higher Education Subcommittee, reached out to them since they have a network of students within their sphere of influence, and we had 17 young adults, ages 18 to 24, that were interested in getting involved, and I talked to each one either in a one-on-one meeting or by phone call on what they wanted to see happen and what their visions were. And like I mentioned earlier, we had a meeting on February 6th to talk about this stuff. And so they worked on revamping the mission statement. They discussed opportunities and other announcements. They did a little Q&A session. And the next meeting that's coming up is Wednesday, February 20th. So any of you that are listening to this call that have interns or know of any young adults that are 18 to 24 that would be interested in getting involved, please definitely send them our way, because I do think that at the end of the day, all of the subcommittees are so important. But I think if we want to do effective and sustainable change, that we really need our youth and young adults at the forefront of doing prevention work and all our efforts together. So what are they currently doing? This meeting that we went to is like really powerful, and just hearing them talk. But basically, the trends that were broken down that I noticed that they were talking about is that they want to teach. So they either want to go out into the community, go out into the middle schools and high schools and junior high and talk about consent and bodily autonomy, talk about sexual health promotion, talk about unhealthy relationships and what that looks like. And so different ideas were thrown around as far as, like, you know, we have RP people on the ground, we have TP people on the ground, we have suicide prevention people on the ground. So there's different professionals in the fields that are doing this work, and so how could they possibly collaborate with them, or possibly do something with, like, Boys and Girls Club, or local faith-based communities that house other students, other kids, and working with them. They want to host a series of small events or eventually a big event, so very much like the K-12 subcommittee talked about, and that might look different. And a lot of them brainstorm ideas of stuff and programs that they've done at their prospective schools and what that might look like if they tried to launch that, like, within the community. So they also talked about doing a youth prevention summit as well. They really loved that idea. And then education talks. Some of the really cool stuff that came out of this meeting was them talking about how they really wanted to find unique platforms to spread the message. Like, for example, a lot of them that said they wanted to teach, they want to go out in rural areas, but they don't have the ability to be able to travel and do that. And so being able to reach a broader audience by using a Facebook discussion series. And they talked about how, you know, these issues are stuff that they don't talk about. Like, a lot of this information on sexual violence prevention stuff, on healthy relationships, unhealthy, like all of that, consent in general. Not only was sexual health, you know, not talked about, but consent was definitely not part of the conversation. And so they want to be the generation that talks. And so using Facebook or Instagram or different medias like that could actually unite efforts in doing statewide programming where they talk and they partner with other peer leaders in their community. So in theory, they could talk to somebody in Tahlequah or in Miami or in Durant and do a talk and have that video then put into the classrooms by the different professionals in the field doing the work in the classrooms. And they also talked a lot about networking. So their conversation around that was the fact that they were siloed. You know, they didn't know that, like, OU, for example, does step in and speak out, and OSU has One Is Too Many, and UCO has Broncos Got Your Back. So all, like, bystander intervention programming and bringing awareness and teaching skill sets to students and knowing about incapacitation and alcohol use and, like, what's that about. So they have all these great resources, but they didn't even realize that, you know, in getting in one room together, that they were resources for each other. So they want to be, like, having more conversations with other college, other student leaders within similar programming and figuring out how they can get together more often and share resources. These are direct quotes from the students. So utilizing prevention education, sexual health education, and resource navigation. This subcommittee benefits youth statewide, providing inclusive education, building awareness, collaborating and advocating. The Youth Advisory Subcommittee will create inclusive collaborations and meaningful conversations in Oklahoma. Again, I know this is really wordy, but this is a direct quote from them, and we'll be finessing this as we move forward. But you hear themes of like, we want to feel safe, we want to feel empowered, we want to have an intersectional lens, we want our voices to be heard. And again, tying back, they want to be the generation that talks about these things, because by not talking about it, we're not solving the problem. In fact, it's only creating a bigger problem. So that was really cool to see the youth saying the exact same things that those in, like Elizabeth and I, that we work on. And I guess here, Elizabeth, if you want to jump in and share some of your thoughts, but we've you know, just because we're using collective impact framework and just because we've made some progress, I mean, it did take, it took like 3 or 4 meetings. So with collective impact framework, they say it takes about 2 years before you start seeing like some like actual traction and like real change. And so when you put that into quarterly meetings, you know, that's 8 meetings, right? And it took us probably about this last year, the 4 meetings, to really get to a place where we felt that there was ownership within the subcommittees. So I don't know, do you want to expand on that, like what you've noticed, like as far as the changes for that?
Yeah, so I think when we, you know, started having these discussions about OPLC really being, you know, the sounding board for all these different fields to be involved, you know, the conversation came up in, you know, years past about having subcommittees and what exactly that would look like. So we started having that conversation again because we want OPLC to, and I believe that, you know, the members want OPLC to really be mission driven and to, you know, really do things in the community as well, not just meet and share ideas.
Yeah, lead the way, yeah.
So we were, you know, the conversation came up that the best way to do that is to have subcommittees and to have different subcommittees take ownership over these areas and then come all back together and, you know, drive maybe 1 or 2 initiatives every single year and what we would work on together. So that was the initial idea, I believe, behind subcommittees. So we went into the first meeting, and this really does go into the challenges that we experienced, but basically we went into the first meeting not wanting to control the conversation too much and not wanting to tell each subcommittee exactly what they have to do, what they need to do. This is what you're going to be in charge of. But we wanted them to be empowered to, you know, have their own voice and create this subcommittee of what they want. So that's exactly what we did on our first meeting. And I believe every subcommittee was like, what? What do you want us to do?
They were so confused.
It was very confusing and hard to convey exactly what what we were thinking behind starting subcommittees without telling them what their subcommittee should be. So I think finding that fine line of not micromanaging, but allowing them to take ownership, but also giving enough direction that they knew what to take ownership over was a challenge that we saw really early on. So after some of the feedback from the initial subcommittees, we really started, okay, we need to give more direction. So there just wasn't a lot of direction from the very beginning, and the subcommittees were definitely asking for, please point us in a direction that we need to go instead of, you know, just this free-for-all and hoping that they would catch on to what we wanted. So I think that was definitely a challenge that we experienced in the beginning.
Yeah, and yes, I would say, so that, again, that took about, I think it was the 3rd or 4th meeting where it finally clicked. I know that for Elizabeth and myself, and we've had some also, we have a, initially, or historically, I should say, with OPLC, there's always been a chair, a co-chair type, and I think that we've also, that's how, you know, it's how OPLC has evolved, but also a challenge as well, is figuring out, well, what is the chair's role? What does that look like? What is the co-chair's role? And then, like, you know, if you have a backbone organization like the Department of Health that's really spearheading this, like what is like okay to do, what's not okay to do, and stuff like that. And so we've been very thankful. I have been personally very thankful to have worked with different people who have come on board. And I think we've made this transition into realizing it doesn't need to be like super official in the sense of like we have a chair and a co-chair, but we just call it the OPLC Advisory Board. And I think we also noticed that with, I don't know your thoughts, but we've also noticed that with the subcommittees as far as when we initially, I think the second meeting, we're like, okay, y'all, like, here, you're like elected a chair and a co-chair of your subcommittee. I think everybody really freaked out and got very stressed of like, oh my gosh, what does this mean commitment-wise? And so, I don't know.
Yes, I mean, yeah, we all have, I feel like, you know, we're in the field that never stops.
Yes,
we are in
yes.
the field of,
True.
I mean, true, like, you know, life challenges. So to sign up for just one more commitment is terrifying for everybody. So I think that was definitely a challenge that needed to be addressed, that we need to have a point of contact, but that doesn't mean that, you know, you have to run these initiatives all on your own. And really taking labels off of those positions and taking labels off the advisory team has lifted pressure. So much labels can just add that pressure that you feel like, oh, I'm in charge of this whole thing, I have to get this done. But really, it's a committee, it's a collaboration, so the more we all collaborate together and not say that it's on any one person, I think the more successful it's been as well.
Yeah. So, and this is the first time I'm saying this here, but also wondering about, even with Oklahoma Prevention Leadership Committee, it does sound so official, and so we've been talking about how we almost feel like this has evolved into more of like a collective of like getting different partners involved and to the table. So yeah, I think that again, like labels, like what Elizabeth said, something to be really cognizant of, and just verbiage and language in general, and having clear messages of like what is our common goal and how do we work collectively to that common goal, I think is like super important. It has been a learning curve for everybody that's involved. So if you have been a part of the OPLC advisory team in the past, thank you so much. If you're currently involved, like Tamara from the coalition here is involved as well, and so very thankful to have her support and her input, because she's got knowledge and experiences that she brings to the table that we need to be listening to, we need to be incorporating as well. So if this is something that you feel like you're interested and you want to get involved with the OPLC advisory specifically, definitely feel free to reach out to me, and we can talk and touch base. I think another challenge for us has been using evaluations in the sense of what I saw theme-wise with the K-12 subcommittee. HES subcommittee had brought it up, and the YAS, so the youth advisor, had brought it up too, is like what is going on. And so like we do have, oh, I said evaluations and I was thinking something else. But we do have current information that exists out there, but a lot of them, they wanted to create surveys and stuff like that to get more information. And I don't know what that's going to look like, to be honest. I think that that's going to be a current challenge, and I don't know how we will figure out ways to do that. I mean, I think that one solution is to partner with evaluators, or possibly get evaluators in the community to the table to kind of help with those initiatives. And I think the other thing too, which ties back to what Elizabeth said, was just getting buy-in. Again, when you're sending, and I tend to, the big joke is like I tend to information dump on people. I'm just extremely detailed oriented. That's what I say. So if you have questions, every answer will be in a document I send you. But I think on the offset of that is that people have very limited time. And so I actually learned from one of the recent Youth Advisory Subcommittee members the term WITHM, which means what's in it for me. And so, but I think that's true that we all, no matter our age, we look what's in it for me. So you don't read the whole document, you just skim it. And so, maybe with that is like, how can we condense stuff, but also still get the information out? And I think that by taking away titles and stuff like that, maybe we'll get more buy-in, hopefully, is the idea. And then we've already talked about identifying 2 community partners to lead the subcommittees with the help and support of myself over at the health department. And I think the other thing too, and this is my position specifically, like Elizabeth doesn't necessarily have to work on this portion of it, or Tamara, although we probably could in some capacity. But for me has been really maintaining the passion of the members, because I think it's very easy to get bogged down in the day-to-day. And then again, like Elizabeth mentioned, you have one more thing to add to your plate. And so we're trying to figure out a way of like, how do you integrate this into the work that you're already doing, and how like this just has equal value in the sense that like not to panic because you're going to have support. And then we talked the other day about managing expectations. Did you want to expand on that? As far as, I think what we talked about was, again, ties back into, you know, okay, I'm the team lead. So, okay, we stripped the titles away. You're not a co-chair or a chair of a subcommittee. You are the team lead, the leader. So managing expectations of what is, you know, what is your responsibility, but then also like what is doable and what's not doable. I think the really interesting thing in talking to all the members of OPLC and then specifically within the subcommittees is that we all are so passionate and we all want to do all the things, and that's awesome. But like how can, like, you know, narrow that down to like what is doable so that each member doesn't feel you know, pressured or, you know, whatever. So I don't know, but yeah. Oh, go ahead.
Yeah, and I think on the managing expectations, something, just even being really transparent with conversations that, you know, we all have. I think at the beginning, like I said, we were wanting to be, you know, not influence the subcommittees of what they need to be, and kind of letting those come, you know, more organically.
Yeah.
But also at the same time, it really helped the more we were transparent of, okay, I don't feel like this is working. What is your feedback on this?
Yeah.
This is kind of some of the, you know, the challenges that we have, and having those really open and honest conversations really started leading us more, down a more collaborative path. So, I mean, even sharing these current challenges with you all, it's just having, you know, those really transparent, honest, and open conversations about what's going on, where do we want this to go, and not having, you know, not everything has to be so official, and just planned out so much in those regards.
Yeah, I think we got rid of, I think one of the first things we got rid of was a minute. Because people were like, you know, we'd have people in the community, I'm not going to name names, but they come to me at different points in time and saying like the same thing that Elizabeth shared much earlier, which is that it's so intimidating because you, like, maybe you're a member, maybe you're a mother or a father or a caregiver in the community and you believe in the importance of this and you want to see change in like your local area, and you come to this conversation, but then you hear things like chair, co-chair, minutes, I approve the minutes, I suck at the minutes, and it's very like, it can, I can see how it's structurally, how it's very nice, and I'm all about structure and I like the fluidity of that, but I can also see on the other side how that can be very intimidating and where people are like, I don't even know what's going on, and like, how do they determine who approves what? And why wouldn't you approve the notes that was taken from the previous meeting? Yeah. So I laugh, but that's one of the first things I think that we got rid of, is that kind of officialness. Like, we can still have notes and we can pass out the notes to members that come on board, but we don't need to do approval processes or anything like that. Current feedback from members. So again, these are direct quotes. This is from the evaluations, the qualitative portion that you all saw on a previous slide. But people are saying things like the subcommittees are a great idea. So glad this group exists. Loved learning about different resources. Presentation was great, very informative. For that one, we do have speakers come in, so we do try to allow our members to have the opportunity that when they come to these meetings, they're doing subcommittee work, but that they're also getting additional training as well. So we have people that come in, and it's not like Elizabeth, Tamara, and I get together and we're like, well, this is exactly what we think is important, and so we're just going to have this presenter come in and talk. We actually go through the evaluations, and we have strategic planning meetings behind the scenes where we use the evaluations, the feedback that we get directly from the members, and then that is used to then tailor who we come have present. Another person put, very excited to continue the subcommittee work. I feel that it's going to be really productive. Now, obviously, I put some like really positive feedback. That's not to say that we don't have what we would call not negative, but critical feedback. I think that we're still in that transition of like, yes, people are knowing their roles, but I think it's like when we have new people come in, because we are open to like people can come in at any point in time, of like the hard part has been like, okay, well, I'm coming in, you all have this. It's interesting because their perception is like we have it all together, and and we're still very much figuring out, but then it's also still like knowing their role and knowing what they're contributing. So I think it's always going to be a revolving door of being transparent, communicating what we need from the members, but then also listening what the members need from us as well. So here's the part where we talk about connecting the dots, especially for those of I don't know how many of you are in prevention or intervention. And actually, before we start, could anybody type in, like, if you do direct services or if you are in prevention, so we can get an idea of who's been on this call? And granted, we probably should have started with that, to be honest, but better late than never. Oh, hey, Cassie. Oh, sorry, maybe I didn't have to name names, but hello. Okay. Okay, so far we have one person on here that does direct services. Thank you for being a part of the conversation. We appreciate you. And again, my apologies, we should have asked that question from the very beginning. I think we were just so excited to get started with the webinar that we just took off. Okay, so I think that's the amount of responses that we're going to get at the moment, but that's really helpful, especially as we connect the dots.
Yeah, so really this is just how do you connect the dots between prevention and intervention, because a lot of times, prevention is in their own world, their own silo, and don't interact with intervention a lot. And really, when I started working more in the counseling department, I saw how crucial that relationship is to be working between the prevention person and the intervention person, because there isn't a lot of overlap there. So first, I just encourage, if you do work in direct services, if you've never gotten to know what prevention is going on at your agency, reach out to that person or, talk about what prevention efforts is going on within your organization. And just get more of a background knowledge of what exactly is going on there. But something else to really think about is how can you implement this model within your own organization or agency? Can you do prevention-focused work, focusing on the climate of your agency, focusing on having a positive climate within the building as well? And maybe that looks like developing a task force of getting, the intervention and prevention people all at the same table to have these discussions about how are we all going to have uniform trauma-informed language, how to have healthy employee management, how to build an environment that encourages self-care. I feel like, I don't have to preach too much to say that we are all in the field that we tend to neglect ourselves a lot. I think, we hear the word self-care all the time, but we have 50 million things we have to get done, so self-care is very last on the list. But how do we encourage that within our agencies and within our with our coworkers? of putting that higher on the list, because we have to take care of ourselves before we can take care of anybody else, and just how important that is. And then also reviewing agency policies. Now, maybe you're not directly over agency policies, but within, your group of coworkers, what can you do to talk about how you will interact with one another? How, what are your core values and core agreements with working with one another?
Yes. So with OPLC, so that is one of the things that we are asking you to consider doing if you're not already involved, and especially we need more representation from people that provide direct services, and if you can and have the ability, or here's the other thing too, if you're like, oh, this is great, Michelle and Elizabeth, this is awesome, everything that I've heard, but I don't have the time and I can't come, is there somebody in your agency that can also attend? And I'm not talking about the prevention people, I'm focusing on intervention people. Is there somebody else in your agency that can come in and attend these meetings? Because again, your voice is so incredibly important. And so this is just a calendar and showing the date. So our next one is going to be Thursday, May 2nd. We do have it at the Oklahoma City County Health Department. And then below that picture is a blurb on that their quarterly meetings held the first Thursday of the month from 1 to 3:30, which, yes, I do recognize is a really long time. Again, we get together, we share challenges, successes, we have a speaker, and then we get into the work groups. And for those of you that are like, oh, the work groups or the subcommittees sound really interesting, but again, I don't have the time, you still can attend the OPLC meeting. That's totally up to you, and then maybe bring a colleague that can actually participate in the work group portion of that. So that might look differently for everybody. And I know that we are wrapping up with time, so I am the main point of contact for OPLC in general, and so that is my information there. So my phone number is 405-271-3430, and the email is michelleXS, like extra small, don't ask why, at health.ok.gov. So that's my information. And then, of course, there's Tamara's information, and then Elizabeth's as well. So you can contact any of us. But before we wrap up, do you all have any questions that you want to type in that we can answer? Because we've just shared a lot of information with each of you.
I do just want to mention as well, if you do find yourself working with any schools or working in the community, please feel free to reach out, either probably email me. I'm not always around my phone, but email me if you do need resources. I can provide, you all with different trainings or different resources that we have, especially if you are working with the schools in your area, and I am happy to do so.
Yeah. I guess my little tie-up comment, since we don't have any questions, is that the work that we are all doing is so equally important. Whether you are doing intervention and direct services or you're doing prevention, I think the thing that we're trying to do with OPLC specifically is get outside of our silos. You heard that in the conversations from the subcommittees. I think that happens a lot, right? We're very well-intentioned with our efforts. We might have strict policies or guidelines that, keep us within certain framework in our lanes, but how can we figure out ways to really collaborate with one another, talk and have those open, honest conversations that Elizabeth mentioned earlier, and get out of the silos. Because again, if we're going to do if we're going to do prevention, if we want to see positive change here in Oklahoma, then we need to strip away those silos, and we need to start, I use the term playing in the same sandbox, but we need to be getting together and talking. And so this is where, I know Elizabeth and I have worked really hard in showing a united front. She is with the Department of Ed. I'm with the Department of Health. And, I think that we are talking more now than ever before in the past, and I think that is a really cool thing to see, and we're working with our coalition. And so again, wanting to bring more people into the fold, have these conversations, I think is so important. So again, if this is something you're interested in and want to be a part of, or if there's something you want to share, I believe that this webinar is going to be archived and available, and so Tamara will send out that information. But please share it, because people need to know what we're doing in our state. We're doing awesome things. I just don't think enough people know about it. So thank you all for your time.
Thank you.
All right, ladies, thank you guys so much for all of that amazing information, a wealth of information, and I hope everyone was able to get information that they will be able to apply in their daily positions. Yeah, if you have any questions about anything that was discussed, please do not hesitate to reach out to Elizabeth or Michelle. And the CDS VRP secret word for this webinar is connecting the dots. I was waiting for some interaction until I realized people are not typing. So, all right, guys. So thank you all so much. Stay tuned. Keep checking our Facebook and our website for more training webinars coming your way, and we will see you next time. Thank you.